towards R&D or some of that innovation side, or do you think the plans that they already have in place are going to just continue as they are?
Well, I think the R&D spend specifically, Anthony, probably can drop a little bit because they're getting very close now. They're at the beta builds and they'll go to gamma next on the fuel cell truck. So the innovation piece, obviously, if you're going to cut everywhere, you're going to save some money bringing, as I mentioned a moment ago, bringing things in-house to do them there. They're talking about 25% less spending this year. They spent $805 million last year and all in, SG&A and R&D and everything like that. This year, they're talking about spending $600 million. In both cases, they don't have the cash to cover that. So that means they have to go to the equity markets. I don't know about R&D itself, if there's really going to be quite as heavy a need. I think right now the idea is let's get to production. Let's get some trucks that we can sell. Let's generate some revenue. One thing that Kim did tell me was that, the cost of manufacturing a fuel cell truck is actually going to be less than the battery electric truck, which is interesting because at the customer side, there's a lot of incentives out there, financial incentives from California and from the federal Inflation Reduction Act that will carve a lot of cost out of acquiring one of those trucks. So if you get the truck and you get a hydrogen business going, and they have green shoots of that happening with both a hydrogen hub in Buckeye, Arizona, that's, getting started. And then, the fourth station agreement, fueling station agreement last week, was announced in California. So, they're on their way, they say, to 60 stations by 2026. That's all going to be done with partnerships. Nikola will own a handful of stations, but not a lot of them. They're very expensive, by the way. Probably 17 million was the one number we saw a few years ago, a piece for a station. So it's an expensive undertaking, but it could be very, very lucrative if, in fact, they can have a truck, a fuel cell truck, and the hydrogen for it. They might attract down the road some more interest in financial partners and that kind of thing. But they've got to get from here to there for that to happen.
Yeah, I think that was one of the questions I was going to follow up with. I mean, we saw, I know this goes back to almost the original business model was to kind of own the infrastructure around the hydrogen stations and things like that. I mean, we've heard it, and I think you've talked about it before, where that they may be looking for suitors to kind of spin off that business, sell it to somebody, that hydrogen business. I mean, is that still a possibility as we move forward, especially in a situation where their cash position isn't maybe as strong as it was, say, the end of 2021?
So that's a question, Tony, that I asked on Saturday, and Kim Brady said no, because there is no hydrogen business. And he says you've got to have the truck and the hydrogen to make it work. They will partner and they will invest as little as possible of their own money in these stations and in the hydrogen production. And, the partners will be there for that. The question is, when can you start to generate meaningful revenue from that? If you just look at Cummins, for example, which we talk about them a lot too, they're looking at $400 million in revenue from making hydrogen by 2025. And that's because they make and sell electrolyzers that, one of the ways to make hydrogen is through an electrolyzer. So the idea being that, they're looking at it more from a manufacturing perspective. I don't know that they'll be as much of a hydrogen seller as Nikola wants to be. But you've got to get people that are, that are viable partners that can come in and do this. And I think that there are plenty of big oil companies. BP is one of them. And that was the original talked about partner for Nikola back before the Hindenburg report in 2020 that, kind of really smacked the company hard. But BP is still out there. In fact, the man who runs the energy business at Nikola is a former BP guy, and there are a lot of BP guys on staff at Nikola.
Definitely, it's going to be something that we want to watch closely. And Alan, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We're definitely going to have to keep up with you and for sure take a look at your Truck Tech episode coming out on Wednesday.
Yeah, that's going to be Alex Rodriguez from Embark Trucks. Looking forward to having Alex with us. Embark being, one of the startups in the autonomous trucking space, made some interesting moves recently with providing a truck over to Night Swift with their technology in it. So we'll catch up with Alex. It'll be good to see him.
Awesome, Alan. Looking forward to that episode. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, guys.
Right now, we're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.
From the truckload quoting page within TIE-TMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TIE-TMS can optimize your quoting process.
Like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
Hey everybody, this is Thomas Watson, Enterprise Trucking Carrier Expert here at FreightWaves, telling you about my show, Loaded and Rolling. Now, it involves trucking topics for large carriers and even small ones that wish to be large. Anything that impacts trucking, you can get it there. You can catch us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on tv.freightwaves.com. We do it live.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now on this carrier update. Donnie, going to break things down. What we talked about in the first carrier update, but going to break it down kind of by regions now. What's the best region in the market or what's the best reefer region right now?
I'm sure this is very arguable, but I like the Midwest. Why? Because of the volumes. The volumes really help out, really help keep more opportunities in the Midwest, keep those trucks moving. When you look at rejection rates, you can tell maybe the Southwest or the Mountain Prairie markets have a little bit higher rejection rates, but the volumes, very few volumes. Yes, some volume, but not near as much as the rest of them. Now, dry van, I like Midwest, maybe the Southeast and back, or stay in the Midwest. But for here, I think you'll do a lot better running up in the Northeast.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to run in the Northeast.
That's the biggest issue, right? Is nobody wants to go up there, because if you get up there in that Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire area, you can get stuck. And if you're stuck up there, now granted, now those backhauls out of those markets are paying better than what they were a couple years ago. I mean, we've talked about it, right?
Yeah.
Out of like the Boston market.
You can always cut that reefer off and see if you can find you a dry van as well. So you got a lot of flexibility with the reefer.
That's true.
To get out of there. But it's hard to get past right here.
Yep.
Everything seems to quicksand and deliver back in. But if you are getting out of there, it might be $2 a mile all in, getting out of there. So roughly $1.30 a mile plus fuel. But if you get back to the Midwest and keep them going, you can make some pretty good lanes. Now today on our lanes of the day, we're going to look at Chicago to Fresno. It's a tough lane, but then we're going to say, you know what? Let's go back. Let's do Chicago, Dallas, Dallas to Atlanta, Atlanta to Harrisburg, then Harrisburg back to Chicago, and see what those rates look like. And how do you want to run this? You have a lot more stops, that 2 hours unload, 2 hour reload, hour in between. So we're going to have, 5, 10, 15 hours of sitting around versus no sitting around on this lane, just be able to run it. So it depends on how you want to run your companies and what do you need to do. If you have teams, you don't be running teams short mileage. You may have to do the long hauls for the teams to keep them really rolling and making that, 2,000 miles every couple of days.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know we talked about it, but you said the Midwest. You have to think of the markets that are in the Midwest, right? Chicago, Joliet, Milwaukee, Columbus, Indianapolis. There's 5 decently sized freight markets. You think about down here in the Southwest, you've got Fort Worth and Dallas and Houston. Yes, you have Arkansas, but I mean...
I would count Laredo.
Yeah.
Only because Laredo is the biggest
cross-border
to Mexico.
You have the 4 markets in Texas, and then you have a little bit of movement out of Northwest Arkansas with poultry and things like that, but it's not an overwhelming amount, right? I mean, it's really one commodity is coming out of there. You know what that is, and it's going out. But again, 5 markets versus... And
you got a lot of dense population in this area, and they absorb a lot more freight than they produce. So that's why everything kind of quicksands. All right, let's jump into our next chart here. Here I've got our reefer head haul index. So now we're looking at the capacity balances. Is there more inbound trucks than outbound freight, or more outbound freight than inbound trucks? So we want to look at the blue markets, and you still kind of see them. This is why I chose Dallas. I chose Dallas, but Fort Worth, Dallas, very close together. And we'll check that one out here. That might be a good one. Fresno lit up blue over there. Joliet, Chicago. You can barely see Chicago right here behind it, but there's Chicago. Green Bay. You got a lot of blues here in this concentrated area of the Midwest, which... If you have a market that's blue and surrounded by blues, it's probably going to be a lot tighter of a market. Yep. That's why I'm very interested in Chicago and Joliet right now. And you still got, Indianapolis. Columbus is flipped. Atlanta, flipped. Harrisburg, good. Allentown, no. New Jersey, yes. So we'll see how those work out here. But you definitely want to keep in mind what these blue markets are, because that's where you want to try to keep your trucks running. Or if you're going to do pricing and you're going to do a red, you can go to the red, but you better price it properly.
Yeah, and this is why you said the Midwest and the Northeast. Look at the amount of blue, even if it's the lightest shade of blue. I mean, it's still pretty significant, but it really runs all the way from South Dakota over to Columbus is really where we see that real first red market. Yeah. We're here, obviously we have one big head haul market, but that's it.
A couple small down there as well, So keep this head haul map very close to you. If you're running reefer, you're going to need it.
Awesome stuff. Thank you, Donnie, as always, for this update. Right now, we'll hand it over to Anthony Smith with our community section today.
Hello and welcome to the Communities Highlight section of FreightWaves Now. And today we're shedding some light on one of our best communities, and that is, of course, the Stockout with Mike Baudendistel, head of Intermodal. And so he's also our CPG expert as well. And so, Mike, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Today we're getting to chat about Walmart and a few other items, but that's a big one because Walmart just had their earnings call. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, I think any of the communities could write up about Walmart, from their perspective angle, because they're so important. I mean, for CPG, they're about a 20% customer, in some cases more than 20% customer for a lot of the big CPGs. And I think that's only going to rise because Walmart's taking share in grocery, taking share among higher income, shoppers. And then there's a good attach rate where they go in for the groceries, buy other sort of consumable type items. So it's hard to overstate, Walmart's importance. And it's always been one that I've looked at just because it gives you a good insight into the economy. And I can talk a little bit about that. Sort of as far as the consumer economy goes, I mean, as you probably would expect, they're cautious on the consumer. And to put some numbers around this, the last 5 years, they've grown at a 6% compounded annual growth rate. They say their typical long-term goal is about 4%. And this upcoming year, they're expecting sales growth overall to be between 2.5% and 3%. So they're sandpapering that down. That includes a 2 to 2.5% same-store sales growth in the U.S. And you do have to sort of say, well, that doesn't sound so bad, but they are certainly naturally hedged. When you get into a situation where consumers are a little bit more stretched, they go to Walmart for value. They're taking some share in certain places. Interesting. We were going back and forth on this on Slack, but one of the things that they've been looking at has been the auto loan delinquencies, which they view that as an indicator of their sales to an extent, where the past 60 days, the number of loans that are 60 days past due at this point are 1.84%, which doesn't seem like a high number, but is 27% higher than a year ago. So it does suggest there's a lot of consumers out there that are feeling pretty stretched. So probably not telling anything you don't know there on the consumer. The consumer's under pressure, but certainly Walmart is baking that caution into their guidance. As far as how this more directly relates to CPGs, aside from maybe saying, well, their sales are going to be a little bit lower, it's my viewpoint that Walmart and some of the other big retailers are going to be less accepting of CPG prices in this upcoming year, and the CPGs are going to have to justify any further price increases, to a greater degree than they have in the past few years. I mean, a lot of these CPGs have gone through 3, 4, 5 different rounds of price increases. There was a really good quote that I found from the Edgewell personal care CEO. This is a company that owns Schick Razor, where he just said it's going to be really hard for CPGs to raise prices further from here on these retailers. There's going to be pushback from the retailers. So I think that Walmart didn't come right out and say that, but they did say that they expect gross margins to be higher in this upcoming year than they were in the past year. I mean, one of the ways you would do that would be to sort of hold the line on your supplier costs a little bit, although they did say that they expect their supply chain costs to come in lower, just because there's going to be fewer supply chain disruptions. And so what I think that means for CPGs is that the CPGs aren't going to be able to use the supply chain issues as an excuse as to why there needs to be higher on-shelf prices. And maybe that means that Walmart's going to be a little tougher on time and in full type fees, because Walmart doesn't view supply chain issues as still being a big deal that it should be for the CPGs. Now, some of the CPGs say it still is. Most of the CPGs say it's better than it was, but those problems are still crop up and are worse than they have been sort of throughout most of history. But I thought that was interesting as well. I think on the good news side of things from the CPG's perspective, Walmart still acknowledges lots of inflation in food prices, and they say that's been sort of stubbornly high in food and consumables. They're talking about those being up still sort of high single digits. So all those things I think are important for CPGs.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at, say, with the CPG companies, I mean, you look at their cost break or their input costs, right? You're seeing those input costs continue to rise. I mean, you look at the producer price index, right? And you start to see that the number still continues to trend higher, right? It was worse than expectations just this last month. It's still outpacing what we've seen to the consumer, but it sounds like Walmart doesn't want those price increases at the CPG's company just to get passed through to the consumer. They want to be able to hold those prices steady, offer that value to consumers, both high income and those that are the value shopper. I mean, is that basically the overall trend that we're seeing, is that they understand that those input costs are rising, but they're just not willing to budge as much on their pricing model?
Yeah. So we'll see how things develop. I mean, I think you bring up the PPI. I mean, when you look at the PPI specifically for food in the last month, that was up about 9% year over year. And then those companies say, well, it's not just the ingredients, which, some of those ingredients, you look at the commodities, those have come way down, but it's things like the packaging material, the label, the labor that's required, all of those things have gone up. And so I think, CPGs are working with Walmart and those type of things. I mean, Walmart's always looking to take costs out of the supply chain. And I think in certain cases where there's a clear input that's clearly much higher for the CPG, that, let's say, Walmart feels itself in its private label brands, and it's invested a lot in those private label brands. I mean, the share of private labels up like 160 basis points, I think they said year over year, that when there's a clear input, I think they're going to be more accepting of having a higher on-shelf price. But I think the burden is going to be more on the CPG to demonstrate that their costs are higher and why they're higher. Whereas the past 2 years, everything was up across the board. And I think it was easier to get price increases through.
Yeah, that was going to be a follow-up. Just, is this an opportunity for Walmart to bolster that, to really lean into their private label as that growth arm in the grocery space?
It's definitely going to be an interesting one. And Mike, switching into the other top story, what is the latest preliminary report coming out of Palestine in that derailment situation?
Yeah, so the NTSB released their preliminary report late last week, and I think it was Thursday. And it was really interesting because sort of before that, I talked to some contacts in the industry, and even including some we had on FreightWaves TV. And the thought process before that was there was something the matter with those detectors on the wayside, the hot boxes that measure how hot the wheel bearings and axles were. But based on that report, it didn't seem like there was any failure as far as those hot boxes are concerned. It illustrated that the wheel bearings heated up to an extreme degree in a very short amount of time. And it seemed like, there's no evidence that the crew did anything wrong. There's no evidence that that there was anything the matter with the track. Didn't seem to be any evidence that there's an issue with the detectors, although that's still under investigation. It did seem like it was this one particular rail car that was hauling plastic pellets where the axle heated up in an extreme way in a very short period of time. And it's not clear why that was, but I think that's what the investigation is going to center around. So I think that was interesting. You sort of think about, well, what might this mean for railroad regulations? And one of the things that the NTSB brought up in their press conference was that different railroads have different standards for how hot an axle has to be before the rail car is taken out of service. And so I think it could lead to a uniform national standard where maybe it has to be taken out while it's at a somewhat of a lower temperature. It is curious why different railroads would have different standards for that.
Awesome stuff as always, Mike. Obviously, people can check you out with the stock out coming up a little later this afternoon. What are you going to be talking about this afternoon? A little later on Monday.
Yeah, so let's go through sort of latest news on the CPG industry today. Similar to the things I've been talking about, in this segment. I also want to bring up that on Thursday have a really good guest on People Speaking Rail. That's going to be Daniel Elliott. He's an attorney, and he's a former chairman of the U.S. Surface Transportation Board. So he was part of the group that was in charge of regulating the Class 1 railroads. And so, he was appointed by President Obama for that role, really has great insight into the inner workings of Washington, D.C. Now he's an attorney that works on behalf of railroad shippers to make sure they're getting good service. So I'd encourage you to tune in for that at Thursday at 3 o'clock Eastern.
Looking forward to both of those shows. Mike, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Great. Thank you.
Right now, we're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.
Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Let's go. Nobody works for free, so why should we be expecting our drivers to? Okay, let's just get it together now. What are some of those proactive steps that you can start taking now? For myself, I would like the Earth to still be here for a little bit longer, but is a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh, okay. Is pizza an open-faced sandwich? It's bread.
I have been ready for this question. I've seen the show.
We're all in this together.
Thanks for making me hungry. Now I want a hot dog.
You're welcome. Catch episodes of Check Call Tuesdays at 12:30 on FreightWaves TV. Keep up with all things Check Call on freightwaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.
From the truckload quoting page within TieTMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TieTMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan, and this is Social Roundabout, where we take a look at what's trending on social media. So this first video is actually about a week old. It comes from the Wyoming Highway Patrol, and it was posted on our Back the Truck Up TikTok page. It got over 3.5 million views and over 80,000 likes, and it shows a close call between a tractor trailer and a Wyoming Highway Patrol. Little too close of a call for me. I mean, if he took another second to look up, he probably would have been in a lot worse of a situation. So the Wyoming Highway Patrol did say to make sure that you are slowing down around emergency vehicles that are on the road. Like I said, that video was posted on Back the Truck Up. Make sure that you're following them for a bunch of trucking related TikToks and content. So now, the next thing I want to talk about is something that's very near and dear to my heart. Today is February the 27th, and it's also Pokemon Day. So they did a huge expo today. This is a video that they posted a few days ago on all of their social media sites about Pokemon Day, and they've already actually done their expo. It got started at 9 o'clock this morning, and they're going to be releasing 2 new DLCs for their newest games, Scarlet and Violet. The first one is going to be called the Teal Mask, and it's going to come out this fall of 2023, and then the second one is going to be the Indigo Disc, which will come out just a few months later in the winter of 2023. So I'm really looking forward to that. I've been playing Pokemon since I was very young, probably around 4 or 5, and I cannot wait to start playing these new DLCs. That's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout, but I want to ask Tony and Anthony, guys, do you have any fond memories of Pokemon games growing up?
You know, I think it's the first game I remember playing.
I remember those long car trips where you just had to like stock up on 5 packs of batteries just because if you didn't have a recharge, you had to save and get out and get in there. But I kind of just can't keep up after like the 3rd generation. Yeah. It's just so many now, but excited to hear about this news. And of course, Isaiah, good job on that Social Roundabout. Speaking of news, coming up, we're going to have our very own State of Freight once again, and that's going to feature our very own founder and CEO, Craig Fuller, along with Zach Stricken, head of Freight Market Intelligence. And this one's going to be talking about preparing for freight market changes. And this is something that you don't want to miss. These two are some of the best and the brightest, if not the best and the brightest in the industry. And whenever these two get together to talk about what's happening, it's time to listen.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of information out there. Obviously, last week, Global Supply Chain Week, it's in the rearview mirror now, but doesn't mean our virtual event fun stops there, right? We've got Supply Chain Meets FinTech coming up in just a few weeks, followed by 3PL Summit, and then we're back in person in Cleveland, Ohio with Future Supply Chain.
That's right. So get registered for those virtual events and for 2 legends talking about the state of freight. Right now, we're going to look at the last 24 hours in the freight market and take a short break. We'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.
Fortnite last night.
the weirdest show in freight? Catch your nooner with Dooner right here on FreightWaves TV live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon Eastern Time, or on video on demand and podcast players whenever you gotta scratch that itch.
When guests come to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
From the truckload quoting page within TieTMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TieTMS can optimize your quoting process.
And we're back with a check of your headlines. PACCAR Incorporated is recalling 6 models of Kenworth and Peterbilt medium-duty trucks over 4 model years for possible sudden brake failure that could lead to a crash. Certain 2021 to 2024 Kenworth and Peterbilt vehicles make up the list of trucks recalled. The pedal plunger Connecting the brake pedal to the brake valve may disconnect when the brake pedal is fully applied and then released rapidly, and brake failure could result. The pedal plunger that connects the brake pedal to the brake valve may become then disconnected, causing brake failure. The recall began with Bendix Commercial Vehicle Systems recall of the 10,425 brake parts. Bendix sold those only to Kenworth, according to the recall filing. Steam Logistics is offering employees $2,000 to quit the company, according to the avoiding the cost of layoffs, even as it continues hiring new workers for its U.S. network. The Chattanooga, Tennessee-based 3PL says it has offered the Cash for Quits program periodically for several years, but it usually attracts few takers. Employees received the latest offer via email this week. Quote, "It's simply an offer to anyone in the company, and it's meant to help people move on if their heart is not in it for the long term at Steam," unquote, said President Steve Cox, told FreightWaves in an email on Saturday. Paying an employee to quit offers from an employee buyout because structured plans typically include pay and benefits for a defined period of time. Layoffs can be even more expensive. The contract load accepted volume index, which measures accepted truckload tender volumes, is 25% lower than the peak values in 2021. With rejected tenders being near historic highs at that point, Zach Strickland reports we can assume this was the limit to the amount of volume carriers could be remade. The supply side of the trucking transportation market is very slow to move, historically changing only around 1% per month. Strickland says in this week's chart of the week, if we apply that rate forward, it'll be 2025 before capacity and demand are in alignment. Air Transport Services Group, a freighter leasing and airline services company best known for operating dozens of cargo jets for Amazon, said it expects slower growth this year after generating record revenue in 2022 because weaker economic conditions mean there's less need for its aircraft. The air logistics specialist on Thursday reported earnings showing 11% growth in revenue to $530 million for adjusted earnings before accounting measures of $163 million, up 5% year over year. For the full year, revenue and adjusted profits both grew 18% to $2 billion and $641 million, respectively. And after 9 months filled with liquidity issues, executive replacements, and fraud charges filed against one of its co-founders, logistics technology provider Slink.io announced Thursday it has secured new funding from past investors. According to the Security and Exchange Commission filings on February 15th, one day after former CEO and co-founder Chris Kirchner was charged with fraud by the SEC and the U.S. Department of Justice, Slink.io raised $24 million in new capital led by Goldman Sachs with participation from Bloomberg Capital and ACME Ventures. For those headlines and more, log on to FreightWaves.com. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe for the full FreightWaves experience. Get the FreightWaves app or log on to tv.freightwaves.com. Now time to kick it over to the wall once again for our next carrier update.
Update, now I'm going to break it down. What you kind of hinted at a little earlier, looking at diesel fuel here to start, obviously seeing declines, some more rapid than others.
Yeah, so our dark blue line, this is the one that we're looking for. I know I got a mess here. We're looking for the dark blue line. Comes down, we're at $4.45 a gallon. Yeah. Still headed in the down direction. This is good. Now, these are averages of truck stops in these markets. So here I told you, look at the green line here. Chattanooga, 414. Yep. Well, I found a place in Chattanooga that's 359.9. Now there's other truck stops that are in the market, which is Alabama, North Georgia, and Chattanooga area, almost to Knoxville, that they all average out, and their average out is the 414. So you're going to have those higher and lowers. I probably found one of the cheapest places. Now, part of the Chattanooga market is once you cross the Georgia line, it gets expensive pretty quick because Georgia has added back their state taxes. So here in Georgia, it's right at $4.60. So that could be a difference. That's why it's not going to be exact here. But just having some fun here. The U.S. average $4.45. Chattanooga $4.14. You can bring these up by market, Tony. Chicago $4.28. $5.08. San Francisco, still $5.63 average for diesel fuel. And Harrisburg, PA, on the other side, that's competing with the West Coast, $4.87.
Yeah, I mean, that 487 is alarming, but look where it was just a little while ago, right? I mean, we're talking almost 550 at the beginning of the year. So, I mean, it's seen a big drop, and it saw it right there in the middle of January. You look at that San Francisco price, and it's basically where it was in December. It's not gone down, right? And it's not going down in any significant way, whereas you look at the Chattanooga line and that slope there at the very end, it's kind of that accelerating down, which is the good thing. That's what you want to see. Like, obviously, any downward movement's good, but you'd rather see faster downward movement than slower downward movement.
And one of the best ways to pull this up is we go to the next chart here. I love looking at this one here. I've focused on Oklahoma City. If you hover over it, turn your hover on, and you can hover over each market and see Oklahoma City, $3.68. Might be a nice place to live right now because we're looking at almost here, 40 cents cheaper than the Chattanooga market. But you can look, you see the lighter colors right through here through Texas and Oklahoma. And then as you start to get away, a little bit further away, they start to darken up. Darker the blues, the higher the prices. So you get up in here to northern New York, West Coast out there, you can see they're both very dark blues. And so you see where our two highest prices are and in between. But you can go over and hover over your routes and try to find these markets that are the cheapest diesel fuel with, so you can fuel in those markets. One time fueling up in an expensive market might be all right. But Tony, if you can fill up in the cheapest markets every day on your routes, you could probably save, $3,000 to $5,000 per truck over a year.
Yeah.
And now it's over a year, but still, that could be the difference of whether you're in business or out of business.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing, and the good news is you can put this, and then you can also look what we looked at earlier, right? Where those operating conditions within the market, right? Is capacity changing? Can I raise prices going into a market? Do I have to drop prices? I mean, one area I'm looking at, Florida, right? Southern Florida. Their fuel prices are pretty elevated when you look at other areas in the Southeast. Hardest area to operate in as well, right? So it's like, is it worth going in there to pay higher fuel costs at cheaper rates?
Yeah, exactly. And you can, use a combination of your lane or market dashboard to check those lanes coming in and going out of different markets, and keep this in mind because this is the second largest cost. All right, let's pop over here to the next chart here right quick. FreightWaves National Truckload Index continues to go down. It bumped back up for the weekend here, but already back down to 238. So I want you to keep that in mind, and then we'll compare it with our contracted rates here. Let's go to the next chart. And I brought up our reefer contract. So here, we're down to 238 here for our NTI, and our contracted freight is 245. So reefer contracted freight without fuel is higher than the average spot market rate right now. And you kind of look, this has been kind of going down. Reefer came up here right at the beginning of the year, and it's been pretty steady here, right where we are. So contract's been holding steady, spot still going down for reefer.
Yeah, and if you started to look through that up there with the van rate, the van rate's come down quite a bit as well, but that reefer rate is still below it, so we're still waiting for that inflection point.
We'll look at it tomorrow.
Awesome stuff. Well, Donnie, thank you so much. Right now, we'll hand it back over to Anthony Smith.
Awesome, guys. Thanks so much for that update. Right now, we're welcoming on Joanna Marsh, and we're going to talk about some of the changes happening at Union Pacific. Joanna, thanks so much for being here this morning.
Thanks for having me, Anthony.
So, Joanna, jumping into it, there is a big announcement that was put out this Sunday, and that's around the CEO shifts happening at Union Pacific. Can you tell us a little bit about the headline items here?
Yeah, sure. So Union Pacific confirmed Sunday, kind of following up on a report in the Wall Street Journal, that the current president CEO, Lance Fritz, will be leaving his position, and Union Pacific is on the search for a CEO to replace him, actually sometime this year. So I'm not quite sure the timing, but they did say 2023. And so that's one part of the piece. The other part of the piece is that this pending departure comes as one of the shareholders, Sorben Capital Partners, I believe their hedge fund, was pressuring UP to remove Mr. Fritz and put in a new CEO. So that's kind of the situation right now.
This seems like a trend that we've seen in transportation. I mean, one of them, obviously not rail specific, but we saw C.H. Robinson, kind of the same kind of idea, right? Having a change of leadership at the top. But the railroad industry has seen multiple changes at the top across the board. I mean, you saw CN have a shift, CSX has had a shift. I mean, is this just a hedge fund wanting to try to generate more return for shareholders? Is this a kind of, they've lost faith in Lance Fritz's ability to lead the company forward as we exit the pandemic? I mean, what exactly was their reasoning behind kind of trying to, I guess, force the hand of the company to make this change?
Right, yeah. So there are kind of different things going on here. It's interesting because there was a press release by Sorben that got put out with them saying, to replace Lance Fritz with a seasoned rail executive, and then UP put out its own statement saying that it's going to look for an executive who may or may not come from the rail industry. And so it's actually very similar to the situation that happened with Canadian National, or CN as they call themselves, where the former CEO, Jean-Jacques Rouet, was asked by one of the shareholders to leave the company because CN had tried to acquire Kansas City Southern, and that didn't happen. that didn't go well, and CN's rival, Canadian Pacific, ended up acquiring KCS, and so that's a whole other story. But it is kind of interesting because the CEO transition is very similar to what is happening with UP, in the sense that you have a shareholder coming in asking for a change, asking for a seasoned rail executive to take the place. CN chose to install Tracy Robinson, who has a background in oil and gas. She does also have a background in railroads, but her most recent positions were within the oil and gas industry. So she's been with CN since last February. So you have that one piece. The other piece is that well, actually two other things. Union Pacific has gotten kind of a lot of bad press actually within the last year because of service issues and because of the embargoes that were happening, with the chicken feed processor, or with the chicken farms processor out in California, and then there are reports of low morale, and so those were among the reasons that Sorben pointed out as not so much the embargoes, but just sort of the regulatory pressure, I guess, about why Lance Fritz should leave. The interesting thing, though, is that besides the surface issues that happened in 2020, UP actually had a fairly low operating ratio and like around 60, hovering around the 60% mark. And so, its financials really weren't that bad, relatively speaking. So it's just a lot of the surface issues, and I think a lot of the bad press that happened last year kind of was a catalyst perhaps for things. But the other interesting thing, I'm sorry, going on for a long time, is that as you mentioned, that there are a lot of CEO changes within the Class 1s recently. You had the CN with Tracy Robinson. You also had CSX hire Joe Hinrichs, who was an executive with Ford Motor Company. So you had an outsider of the rail industry coming in and then you also had Norfolk Southern former CEO Jim Squires retire, and then you had Alan Shaw, who was with Norfolk Southern as the chief marketing officer, become CEO. And so it's interesting because you've had, if you look at CN, CSX, and Norfolk Southern, CN and CSX had like two shippers, executives from shipper groups coming in, and then you had Norfolk Southern, which the marketing background, and so it seems that the direction of the CEO hiring has been kind of looking at the marketing sort of shipper side, and I think that's kind of what UP is referencing in its press release about who it's looking for. But of course, you have Soroban saying the operational experience, so it'll be interesting to see who the candidates will be. We won't know, but who they end up picking.
Definitely going to be interesting for sure, Joanna. Is this going to be one of the topics that you cover on your upcoming episode of People Speaking Rail? What is that, Wednesday?
It's Thursdays at 3. Perhaps I believe we're having Dan Elliott, who is the former chairman of the Surface Transportation Board, on. So it'll be interesting to talk to him about everything that's going on with rail, and there's a lot happening.
Thursdays at 3. Joanna, I'm looking forward to it, and thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Have a good week.
You as well. And right now, we're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.
The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
From the truckload quoting page within TIE-TMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TIE-TMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
Welcome back. Well,
Tony, we don't only just do FreightWaves on air. We also have a presence through the airwaves virtually with SiriusXM.
Yeah, I know. It's great content that we do every day. And we have our host, Grace Sharkey, joining us. Grace, how's it going?
It's going good, guys. Happy Monday.
It is most definitely a Monday. So just to kind of... Obviously, you host the radio show every day, Drive Time, on FreightWaves Radio there on Road Dog Trucking from 5 to 7. Just kind of highlight who's coming on this week. Who do you have as guests joining you throughout the week?
Yeah, it's going to be a good week this week. So starting off every Monday, we have the wonderful Alan Adler with us. And of course, he's going to dive into truck technology. Specifically, I want to talk to him about Nikola and where that's going and what he thinks maybe that story's positive chapter 2 or unfortunate ending could be. Of course, John Kingston will be joining me as well to give us our weekly oil market update. On Tuesday, Thomas Watson is there to update us on his loaded and rolling community. Of course, anything related to enterprise trucking and what's hitting the headlines this past week as well. We're also going to welcome Greg Grimes, founder and partner at West Motor Freight. I actually got to speak with him last week during our Global Supply Chain Summit, and that was really fun. So I figured, why not bring that same conversation to the radio and help people understand exactly what it takes to be a part of the automotive supply chain. On Wednesday, Mary O'Connell will be joining me as we talk, of course, not only about the work she's doing on the cold chain side of things with running on ice, but also check call as well. And then we'll have actually a new guest to the show, Mike Rosia of McClay's Logistics up here in actually Michigan, which will be a fun story because actually it's a trucking company with an added logistics side as well. So of course we'll talk about how important that is for trucking companies that are growing to have that brokerage arm too. So that will be a fun. Plus Mike is just a funny person in general, so we'll have him on. And then on Thursday, Mike Baudendistel always joins me to dive into rail and CPG news. Wonderful Lauren Began will be joining me as well. She is the maritime professor herself, so we'll talk about a lot of the work that FMC is doing and what they're looking for responses to as well. And then Friday, we wrap it up with wonderful Michael Rudolph, who will dive into our pricing power index and see where that's headed, if we're still sitting at 30, if we're headed towards that 20 pricing power towards the shipper too. So good week ahead of us, that's for sure.
Definitely an action-packed week, Grace, and I'm going to be looking forward to it. Real quick, was that 5 Eastern Standard Time, channel 146?
Yep, channel 146, 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you miss it and you're not an early bird but a late bird, then you can check it out at 11 p.m. as well. But if you also have Sirius, let's say you miss it, you also can get the episodes for up to 2 weeks on demand. So you can head over to your SiriusXM app and honestly listen to the show whenever you feel like it.
Awesome stuff, Grace. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be sure to check out you on SiriusXM all week and be tuned in for all the great content you put on FreightWaves Now or FreightWaves.com as well. Right now, we'll take a quick break, but we'll be back with more FreightWaves Now.
Hey everybody, this is Thomas Watson, enterprise trucking carrier expert here at FreightWaves, telling you about my show, Loaded and Rolling. Now, it involves trucking topics for large carriers and even small ones that wish to be large. Anything that impacts trucking, you can get it there. You can catch us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on tv.freightwaves.com. We do it live.
From the truckload quoting page within TieTMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TieTMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan, and this is Social Roundabout, where we take a look at what's trending on social media. Well, today we're going to celebrate one of the most famous games and shows of all time. Today, February 27th, is Pokemon Day. They put out this video right here on their social media channels just a few days ago, commemorating 2023 Pokemon Day. They actually did an expo a little bit earlier this morning, and they talked about 2 new DLCs that are going to be coming to their latest set of games, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. So that first one is going to be the Teal Mask. It's going to come out in fall of 2023, while Indigo Disc will come out just a little bit later in the winter of 2023. And the reason that they're going with DLCs for Scarlet and Violet is because they got a lot of really good feedback about their DLCs that they released for Sword and Shield, which was the Isle of Armor expansion and the Tundra expansion. Now, I bought those for my cousins and they played them for days on end. So I'm hoping to see a lot of the same characteristics from those 2 DLC expansions with these new ones. Lots of new Pokemon to catch, lots of new storylines for people to play. So there's also a new Netflix show that's going to be coming out. It's a stop-motion show, Pokemon Concierge, that's going to be coming out. They also have an app called Pokemon Sleep, which helps monitor your sleep and shows you how much rest and how much like REM sleep you're getting compared to restless sleep. So that's another really cool thing that they have coming out a little later this year. That's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout. Right now, I'm going to toss things over to Tony and Donnie with our next carrier update. Welcome into the final carrier update of the morning. Donnie, going to break down our lanes of the day. Obviously, first lane we talked about, you mentioned it, Joliet to Fresno, but make sure that reefer button's on.
Turn that reefer on. The prices, if you make that mistake, are going to be vastly different. Mm-hmm. We've all made that mistake before, and you'll lose a lot of money. So let's hop in here. Joliet, Illinois is headed out to Fresno, California, 2,118 miles. But you're only going to be running at $2.11. Now, there's good and bad. Yes, this is a little bit lower. It's much lower than our NTI here by 27 cents per mile. But you don't have to stop. So you can keep that truck moving, only stopping for your brakes and keep rolling. So over 4 days, you could spend 10, 15 hours loading and unloading in this same time period. So that's like 1 full day of running. Mm-hmm. So keep that truck moving. But if we hit little double arrows there and turn this thing around, this is what kind of shocked me. You're coming back at 202. Cheaper than what you were going out at. Yeah. Now, if we, I think last week we did drive-ins for, I think it was Dallas to LAX, like $1.63 and $2 coming back. Well, coming back was still higher, but in this case for a reefer, it is dropped down, but it's only 202 coming back. So you're going to average here, about 208, 210 a mile. This is one that you're going to have to sit down and think about if you really want to run this and keep your guys rolling. A lot of good miles. Or do you want to swap over and do something like our next lane here, Joliet to Dallas? A little bit shorter here, 891 miles. Puts you down in the southwest. It can be kind of tough down there, but you're rolling at 262. So we're doing quite better. We're over $2.50 a mile. Yeah. A few months ago, my goal was $3 a mile. Well, I've had to change that because it's very hard to find unless you want to run the Northeast. Out here, I'm looking for anything above 250 now, and this is all in. This includes fuel. So Joliet to Dallas, Texas, 262. Not too bad of a rate. For the long miles, for a 900-mile run, this is still a pretty good run. Hit my little hit my next chart here because I'm not going back. I want to jump from Dallas over to Atlanta, run over here to the southeast. We're going to kind of make not quite a triangle. We're going to add one more step to it. And rates have come down, but it's still $272 to get from Dallas to Atlanta. I was quite surprised. I thought this rate might be a lot lower, but it's not. But when you get in the southeast, it can be a little bit cheaper coming out. So from Atlanta, where do I want to go? Well, Chicago, Dallas, Atlanta. Let's head up to Harrisburg, PA, right up the eastern seaboard. So the next chart here, we're running at 264 from Atlanta to Harrisburg, and these are still some pretty good miles. That's a 700-mile run. Yeah.
I was going to say, you're talking 700-800 miles on each of these. I mean, I think the Chicago to Dallas one's a little longer. It's in the 900-mile range, but still, you're talking 260 across each of those. Well, obviously, we'll get to the last lane. I think the difference here, and the only thing I've picked up on, obviously they come down off their highs and they're staying elevated. I will call out one thing, that Joliet to Fresno lane had actually increased over the past few months. It's not a big increase, but it is an increase, which is kind of a positive, which is why you're seeing it more expensive going in than going out. But still, you're talking $2 a mile versus $2.60.
As this deteriorated?
Yep, it flipped.
It flipped. Normally when you're running into a very hot market, the rate going in is going to be very low, and then coming out is going to be very hot. Well, Fresno is no longer that hot market for the produce season.
Yep.
It's cooled down, so rates started to normalize, and they flipped now just a little bit. So, well, now we're sitting here in Harrisburg. Let's try to get back to Chicago. Next chart. Again, it's a 650-mile run, and we're still at 220. Now, this is going from a northeast and getting out, like we were talking about, and getting back to a hot market. 220 a mile, not too bad.
No, and it's really following the trend of the overall market, right? Look at the NTI, overlaid it. Yes, it's underneath it, but that's kind of expected when you're going out of the northeast. To avoid going up really into the northeast, you're going to have to take a little bit of a price.
Yeah, if you want to go into the northeast, you could be over $3 a mile, up to $4 a mile. But these lanes are going to be shorter. Obviously, from Harrisburg, you can't go too far in the northeast. You only got about 300, 350 miles, and you run out of territory. So you are correct. And, these are longer hauls. That's why we're below that 250 mark. If they were 300 to 500 mile runs, we might be around that $3 mark.
Yep.
But these are some pretty good lanes, and you can keep that truck moving.
Absolutely, Donnie. Thank you for the updates this morning. We'll be sure to check in with you again tomorrow. Right now, we'll hand it over to Bill Priestley with this morning's roundtable.
And welcome into the roundtable. Bill Priestley here with you. And last summer was the deadline that the ILWU had to put together an agreement to try and continue working on the West Coast ports. And still, we're reaching almost March, and we haven't had that yet. Has that had a detrimental effect on the port in and of itself, given other economic concerns going around the country? Joining us to discuss this, we have Lauren Began, the maritime professor, joining us from Boston, Massachusetts, and Sal Mercogliano, assistant professor of history at Campbell University. Always great to have you two on with us. And a couple of weeks ago, we got on and we kind of talked about this a little bit. And since then, we've had a lot of reports about, nearshoring's coming in. Boats are moving to the East Coast. All this seems to be, Sal, you had a great video that you put out about Gene Soroka and how he's trying to explain what's going on with the Port of Los Angeles at this point. Lauren, let me start with you. 2022 was supposed to be the year of labor, and they were supposed to do well with talks. And now, how much of a detriment has this been to not only the union, but to the port itself as we go into the middle of the Q2 2023?
Yeah, so we have the ILWU, the International Longshore Warehouse Union. We have Pacific Maritime Association, who represents all the terminals. And so, there's a lot of reports that are kind of pointing the labor negotiations and the almost 9-month contract expiration on. That's the reason why shippers aren't shipping into and out of Long Beach and LA. I just don't know if we can pinpoint it exactly to only this, right? We've been seeing a lot of expansion on the East Coast in their infrastructure. Certainly it's having a major impact, but I think any sort of disruption that shippers felt during 2020, 2021, 2022 is not soon forgotten. And so I think that maybe it's part of the total package of decisions being made.
Sal, what's your take on the situation? Have the talks kind of put a dent in things as far as how attractive LA Long Beach is to shippers?
Well, the ILWU and the PMA issued a joint letter saying that all is well, the negotiations are ongoing, and that anything you're hearing from the media isn't true because we're not letting any information out. And to be clear, that kind of letter tells me right off the bat that this negotiation is very contentious. Obviously you have issues. The biggest one has got to be the automation issue. It's got to be the issue of where labor is going to find itself potentially out of a job. And that has caused a lot of consternation. As you mentioned, I did a video. I talked about what Gene Soroka did a press blitz recently talking about this, his state of the port, talked about this. He's in a very difficult position, him and Mario Cordero over at Long Beach, because they are landlords. They really don't have much to say. This is between the Pacific Maritime Association, that is the tenants, these are the operators, these are the ocean carriers, these are the yards, the terminals, and the labor negotiation. And, you kind of miss the window here to get this negotiation done when everything was at its peak. But now what we're seeing is a much different situation than we had in 2014, 2015, where ships can go to the East Coast via the new lane of the Panama Canal or on these ultra-large container ships. And LA and Long Beach, along the entire West Coast, has got to get to an agreement here soon, because the fear here is that business may be fading away from them. They're still going to be major. You're not going to lose, traffic going there, but not the dominance that we once saw.
Yeah, so let me just throw up a chart that we've seen here recently over here. This is a look at inbound TEUs into LA Long Beach. This is both ports. And so what you can see kind of from a very basic standpoint is that through up until August of last year, things look fairly consistent. But then past that, the peaks are still there, but the troughs are much more prevalent. And so, Lauren, when you look at that, I mean, I would imagine that you've probably seen it and go, well, that's predictable. But what's your impression there, and how that perhaps might be affecting attitudes and stress points when it comes to these negotiations?
Well, so kind of looking at the global picture too. So that chart goes back to, it looked like 2021. So that's kind of in our asterisk set of years anyways. And so I'd be interested to see what the troughs looked like maybe prior to 2021, because what we did see certainly last summer and in the August timeframe was just the reduction of demand in goods. I think we were seeing a lot of front loading of cargo coming in. Nobody wanted to get in that is Santa coming this year moment. And so I think we saw earlier peaking. But you're right with the troughs. I mean, they certainly are digging deeper. Like I said, I think that it's part of a larger controlling the elements that you can. And so diversifying ports of entry. And so I think we're seeing a lot of people who otherwise were just like, oh, LA Long Beach is fine. That's where we're going to continue to go. Maybe starting to look more at diversification of ports of entry. And like Dr. Mercogliano was saying, now there's different ways of getting over to the East Coast. So it's more of an option than it ever really was before. And so I think you're right. I think that those dips are concerning. Will they stay? I just don't know. I think unfortunately, there's always going to be, well, maybe not unfortunately, there's always going to be demand for goods coming in. 90% of everything comes from ocean shipping into this country. So whether it will continue to stay only on the East Coast, I think is yet to be seen. But like Sal was saying, the West Coast will remain a major player.
Sal, you mentioned, of course, Gene Soroka's publicity blitz that he went on. What do you think he's looking at when he sees that chart that we just threw up there?
Well, I mean, Gene knows that prior to 2020, you already saw the West Coast losing out to the East and Gulf Coast. I mean, you go back, look at John McCowan's reports that he's done back to 2016, and what you saw was this shift taking place. It was alleviated during COVID because of the mass influx of goods coming in. You saw a lot of new liners, a lot of new services come into the ports of LA and Long Beach, and that's why you wound up with 109 ships sitting off of LA and Long Beach. So they know that this had been a systematic issue going before this. But one of the big issues you got to be looking at is it's not just the arrival of the containers into the port and the terminals. And we're looking at ocean freight, obviously, and we're looking at those rates. Why would you pay more money to go out of Asia via the westward route and go into the East Coast and Gulf Coast via Europe or the Panama Canal? And you're doing it for one good reason. It's reliability. It's because if you go through those ports right now, you're seeing reliability. And that's not a ding on Gene and LA and Long Beach at all. But there's a lot of other factors are at play here. You have the drayage factor. You have the laws being passed by California that just phased out trucks prior to 2010. You have the Class 1 rail issues. You have warehousing issues. And you have ports like Houston, Savannah, and New York, New Jersey that are basically sitting there saying, listen, you land the container in our terminal, we're going to get it off our terminal in a set period of time. That was something that LA and Long Beach could not do during the peak of COVID, and it's coming back to haunt them right now, I think.
Yeah, let's take it back full circle. So coming back to the ILWU and the talks that are still ongoing here, Lauren, nobody knows the timetable. Nobody knows anything because not much information is getting out. But best case scenario, worst case scenario, how does this end? And it can, granted, it doesn't have to recoup a ton, but how much has LA Long Beach lost in the process in terms of where people are going to try and offset their goods off these ships?
Yeah, like I said, it's part of the contributing factors. And so the unreliability of not knowing if there is going to be a lockout, a strike, or whatever it is. I mean, both sides have said we don't want to see cargo disruptions. We don't want to disrupt the overall movement of the goods. But like Sal was saying, putting out this everything's fine press release, maybe it is or maybe it isn't. 2015 is kind of has usually been seen as kind of the worst case scenario. That was 10 months of negotiation. Like I said, we're almost 9 months in here. They actually brought in the U.S. Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service at that point. And so maybe we'll see that. I think there was a little bit more disruption happening in 2015 than what we're seeing now. And they in the press release that came out last week, they did say, this joint press release saying, we've agreed to some things, healthcare being one of them. So I think they are making progress. Prior to, I had heard some things about maybe it was jurisdictional issues over a couple different terminals. But then, the joint press release saying nobody knows anything, don't trust any reports. It's hard to say. They really are staying pretty tight-lipped about what's going on. I think the longer it goes, the more it just contributes to uncertainty in this area of the country. And so, like Sal was saying, the certainty of the East Coast is certainly going to be a benefit for that side.
Sal, best case scenario, worst case scenario, hopefully, and how does this end in your mind? We got about 2 minutes, so you can feel free to espouse as liberally as you'd like.
Well, I mean, what they said that they've agreed on is great, but it's what they left out is the big issues. I mean, you're talking about the work of casuals. You're talking about automation. You're talking about a lot of dicey issues that, the last time they negotiated was during 2014, 2015, and we saw what happened then. And we just came out of a situation where labor was in the driver's seat for a long time. They were really the big factor here. And now we see the terminals and the ocean carriers kind of in the driver's seat. And I think there's a lot of potential here for hazard. We have to be worried about a disruption in this. Remember, LA held its post as the biggest port in the United States after last year. So there's still a dominant port. There's still a lot of cargo coming in and out of that West Coast. And if they can't come to an agreement, especially over this issue of automation, this is the thing that dogged LA and Long Beach during this period of time, was the fact that you had truckers showing up at the terminals and could not get their boxes. And it was just a problem. You had some success in the LBCT terminal in Long Beach, TrayPac in Los Angeles, but not at some of the other terminals. And will the carriers be investing in this? Will they be able to phase out the long-term workers who are there and still bring in new workers into this? There's a lot to be worried about on this, I would say. I think, we're seeing a lot of attention being drawn into East Palestine with the railway derailment. I think we need some attention by the Department of Transportation, Department of Labor on this, because if LA and Long Beach, and remember, this is not just LA and Long Beach, it's the entire West Coast. If the entire West Coast goes into a trade disruption, this has massive ramifications across the entire supply chain, not just for the U.S., but for the world.
Lauren, real quick, does this have massive implications in the long run for LA Long Beach?
I think so. I think it does. I mean, like I said, we keep looking at 2015 as kind of the worst case scenario. Now here we are. Luckily, there isn't a lot of trade disruption, but as Sal was saying, 50% of everything was coming into the West Coast. 50%. If nobody wants to go through another disruption, inflation's already up. The longer and more expensive it takes for stuff to get on the shelves, the more expensive it is for everybody. And I don't think the American consumer wants higher prices.
All right. Well, it's definitely going to be interesting. Hopefully they can get things settled up relatively soon and not avoid any more downtime there as well. Lauren Began, Sal Mercogliano, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
All right. We'll take a short break and be back with more FreightWaves Now.
Do you want to watch the weirdest show in freight? Catch It's your Nooner with Dooner right here on FreightWaves TV live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon Eastern Time or on video on demand and podcast players whenever you got to scratch that itch.
From the truckload quoting page within TieTMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TieTMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
And with your final check of headlines, I'm Bill Priestley. Air Transport Services Group, a freighter leasing and airline services company best known for operating dozens of cargo jets for Amazon, said it expects slower growth this year after generating record revenue in 2022 because weaker economic conditions mean there is less need for their aircraft. The air logistics specialist on Thursday reported earnings showing 11% growth in revenue to $530 million and adjusted earnings before accounting measures of $163 million, up 5% year over year. For the full year, revenue and adjusted profits both grew 18% to $2 billion and $641 million, respectively. After 9 months filled with liquidity issues, executive replacements, and fraud charges filed against one of its co-founders, logistics technology provider Slink.io announced Thursday it has secured new funding from past investors, according to the Securities and Exchange Commission filings. On February the 15th, one day after former CEO and co-founder Chris Kirchner was charged with fraud by the SEC and the U.S. Department of Justice. Slink.io raised $24 million in new capital led by Goldman Sachs, with participation from Bloomberg Capital and ACME Ventures. And 1 year ago, Russia invaded the Ukraine. Sanctions immediately followed from the EU and the U.S., but cargo has continued to flow like water drawn by gravity around a stone. While container shipping has stayed relatively normal, Greg Miller reports that EU crude imports from Russia have dropped to near zero levels following a ban on imports. The EU ban on Russian products imports is less than a month old, so it looks too early to know how that's going to play out. In other areas, the EU has been strapped to find new liquefied natural gas suppliers after Russia cut off the pipeline through the Ukraine, causing a 60% rise in importing of non-Russian LNG to the EU. And you can find those headlines and more on FreightWaves.com and on the FreightWaves app. For the full FreightWaves experience, head to tv.freightwaves.com. Now back over to Tony and Anthony for the rest of our show.
Well, Tony, it's been an amazing Monday show, but the freight conversation and content doesn't end here. In just about an hour, we're going to have What the Truck, and of course, we had Mike Baudendistel on a little bit earlier, so he's going to be doing his Stock Out show as well.
Yeah, it's a busy day on the airwaves, right? New episode of The Drop Zone drops right after that episode of Stock Out. And then tomorrow, big day, the State of Freight webinar, preparing for market changes with our very own CEO and founder Craig Fuller and Zach Strickland, head of Freight Market Intelligence. That's going to be awesome, so be sure to get signed up for that. Want to hear all their insights. But really, that does it for us here today. We'll be, a 22-hour break before we're back for more FreightWaves Now tomorrow at 9 a.m.
See you.